Hi, good evening, everyone. I was chatting and was deep in conversation, and all of a sudden I hear my name being called. So, well, thank you, everyone, for being here. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this school. As you probably, most of you know, I'm Fatima Nadiab. I'm the Executive Dean of the Royal Docks School of Business and Law. And I must say, I'm a very, very proud Executive Dean. And the school houses the FinTech Center here at UEL. The center, as you know, is a collaboration between our school, which is the Royal Docks School of Business and Law again, and the School of Architecture, Computing, and Engineering. So we have few research centers here, but the Centre of FinTech is one of our flagship centers, amongst others. It's a hub for research, of course, in FinTech, and has staff in the center working on different aspects of our roles here as educators. It encompasses a multidisciplinary subject area, which covers finance, technology, and regulations. So the center comprises, it has researchers, it has academic staff, and it has postgraduate research students, as well as, I'm very delighted to say, we have PhD students in an area that is emerging, and we're very much in need of such research. So the FinTech, as we said, it's got different dimensions. And in terms of the area that it crosses, goes across, is the application of technologies such as blockchain, DLT, AI, API. Iwa told me about this. I don't know most of them, I can tell you. Cryptography, bibliometrics to finance, and the legal and regulatory issues arising from the derivative product and services. I know very much about the derivative market, I can tell you that, because I'm an economist. So I am really delighted today. Today is a special day. I've started at UEL around nearly 18 months ago, and it never ceases to amaze me, the energy and the effort of our colleagues, because they are absolutely superb. And our students as well, and I like that collaboration that takes place. But today is a special day, because today we are very proud to be hosting the launch of the book that Professor Iwa Salami had written. And the book title is Financial Technology, Law Regulations in Africa. I want to congratulate Iwa on this book, because this title speaks to the heart of the type of research of FinTech that is happening at the center, particularly at times where financial inclusion is in desperate need. And, especially in, I wouldn't, so far, Africa, parts of it is poorer areas, but it's, parts of Africa are emerging areas, and that, must be very difficult to kind of bring all of that together, I would imagine. So the role of FinTech and the work that we do, that is happening here in the center, this is a very active center, and I want to congratulate Iwa and colleagues, because they bring in together from cross-spectrum of regions, as well as cultures, as well as people, and industries as well, and sectors. So I'm really very happy about the fact that the center is facilitating all these important movements and research. So I'm not going to keep you for long, I promise you, but I just want to say I would like to celebrate the center for the achievement, and we have to acknowledge, and keep encouraging colleagues to do much more of joint work. And Again, you don't need me to say to you, anyone who knows anything about our center, they know that it's at the absolute cutting edge work of what is happening now. So I'm going to close by saying thank you all for being here today. I am so looking forward to reading the book, as I haven't received my copy yet, but I'm sure I will get my copy. And I want you to enjoy the evening. This is a true hub and opportunity for us to kind of come together and think of many books to come, I hope, and many articles to come in this school. So thank you very much, and please carry on. And I'm going to pass on to, whom am I passing on? I think I'm passing on to, thank you.
Thank you so much, Clinton, for that introduction. And I'm delighted to see so many people here from a wide range of academic interests. You know you've written a good book when you can get feminist legal scholars, those into Nigerian social legal studies, those into labor law, etc. When you can bring all of them together, including your young son in his suit, then you know a good scholar has written an excellent book. So it's nice to see this. All right, so for those of you I hope they're not trying to have something on PowerPoint, because I'm not a PowerPoint person, I'm sure as all of you are aware. You pay attention to me, and I think you, at least I think that's very good, because I don't think I'd keep in step with the bullet points that you raised that are on the screen. So, where do we go? Where are we? First of all, can we have another round of applause for Professor Salami's book? I think it's a great achievement. It adds to the emerging, I wouldn't say emerging, it adds to the regular body of scholarship that comes out of the law, justice and policing in the University of East London. Now, I've been asked to give the keynote speech, and I want to focus very much on the role of institutions. Iwa, is there something?
No, we need the right slide, but we'll get
to
this, Professor Kofi.
Yes, I want to focus on the role of institutions because in promoting economic transformation, because what Iwa has done is a significant contribution to scholarship regarding institutions. I'm sure you're all aware of the regular refrain that for any country to develop, institutions are very important, probably the most important variable. So this applies to countries and to regions as well, to continents. And what is happening now in Africa, there's been a significant shift in conceptions about regional integration. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is a huge achievement. Well, it's a huge achievement for now. I think it's the world's biggest regional trading agreement, has most people, largest landscape, and it is primed, so it is hoped, to transform the African continent. And I believe that it can only do so if the institutions that underpin the ideas of the drafters, the statesmen and women who are behind this agreement, if the institutions work. And one of those institutions, maybe the most important institution, are the institutions that set out the financial relationships across borders. What Iwa Salami has done, therefore, is to add to, or to at least alert us right now, to the importance not just of financial institutions in general, but their importance for developing trade across borders. Money makes the world go round, and no matter how much we always want to give the impression that it doesn't. You know, when you get your pay slip, the first thing you want to check is that the pay is correct. You know, it shows the importance of money for all of us. And I was reading a book some time back, Why Nations Fail, written by Darren Acemoglu and his colleague Robinson. And you know, Acemoglu and Robinson and their other collaborator Johnson, they've just been awarded the Nobel Prize for Economic Science. I've been reading their work way back. And their book, Why Nations Fail, there's a chapter. And in that chapter, they talk about the state of banking in Mexico around 1900 and the state of banking in America in 1900. And I think in Mexico, there were only 46 banks. whilst in America, the banks were in the thousands. And the point that they make is that American institutions enabled banking more than Mexican institutions did. So no matter how difficult it was in America, people had access to money. They had access to the money that was needed to help build America as we know it. Whilst in Mexico, there was that suppression of finance. And to go to a bank was practically impossible. Probably had to go to a money lender who would charge you 3 times the interest rate. The stories are well told. So, as Imogen Robinson, one of their arguments is access to capital, access to money. That is what's going to change a society. So anybody who writes a book that deals with money in general, especially in modern times, deals with the regulation of finances, makes an important contribution, reinforces the argument made by those scholars. I'm not saying that they're 100% correct. They've been bashed a lot in the press and in book reviews, but I think they have a very good point. The importance of institutions that will enable transformation. Another thing that also comes to mind, and I think I'm going to stitch that into my general comments about the book, is when I was a student, I came across a magazine at the LSE called, I hope the pronunciation is correct, Amaji. It's by the LSE von Hayek Society. And in it, somebody was writing about Hayek's view about digital currencies. That there's going to come a time when currencies are denationalized. And I then went to the LSE library and got one of his books from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Not that I'm a big fan, but at least they have some interesting things to say. And he'd written a paper on the denationalization of currencies. And I thought, well, Mr. Hayek was in his 80s, and maybe it's time for him to take retirement, go and play with his grandchildren. Because how can you have currencies without a government? Everybody knew that governments supplied currencies. And the fact that he was also close to Mrs. Thatcher didn't do him well in those days, so you're best to keep quiet about him. But I don't think anybody here liked Maggie Thatcher in those days. Probably still don't. But you have to appreciate him as a scholar. And he was talking about how technology will bring about a situation where more and more people have access to stable currencies. Because his problem was inflation, that government policy sometimes destroyed currencies. And I'm sure the Ghanaians here, me and Tina, and any other Ghanaian will say that this is very true in some circumstances. So he spoke about the denationalization of money and what we would see today as cryptocurrencies. This was way back. So in his view, and I think in Iwa's view as well, the more cryptocurrencies that you have, the better. Now, I felt that would probably crash the national currencies. And so it was very spooked in those days, but I don't think that's going to happen now. Okay, so these two come together, the importance of institutions and banking and the interesting turn in our financial relationships, that is the emerging role of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin. I remember when Bitcoin was $1, I should have bought some. Yes, everybody should have bought, because that's $100,000. What I see, I just turn the page, because I would have been a millionaire by now. I wouldn't be standing here. So, what has Iwa done? She's published, written a great book that contributes to the discussions about finances. And one aspect of the contribution is the importance of financial access to finances for cross-border trade. If a country is going to prosper, I think you can't hunker down behind the 4 square walls of your country and expect that you're going to go through some serious, a major economic transformation. I'm sure anybody who's followed Chinese economic history will be aware of this. Countries need to open. You don't trade yourself into poverty. Yes, there might be some turbulence caused by trading relationships, but generally speaking, it's a good thing to engage in trade. The longer the distance, the better it is for traders. And one problem that a lot of small-scale traders in Africa have always had is gaining or getting access to official financing. But now, based on what is happening, you can see that the picture is changing, the picture's turning, and that more and more people can now gain access to private currencies if ever they want to. And one of those private currencies, I should say, they're well known to all of us. I think the number one is Bitcoin, but there are other coins out there. then also the ability to make payments across borders. Back in the day, I'm not going to go into details, but somebody I know was traveling in the 1970s, was coming from Ghana to the United Kingdom for a holiday, and had to apply to the Bank of Ghana for £30 sterling. And it took about a month. Yeah, don't laugh, but it's true. It took about a month, and all the paperwork and back and forth, and the stamp.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Clinton, and I'm so delighted to see everybody that is here. I'd like to start by saying, on the day that I passed my PhD, I did my PhD viva, my professor had said to me, Iwa, this is very good, congratulations. You would find that your PhD would be the most difficult thing you ever write in your life. And I thought, oh, that's very consoling, that's very heartening. Thank God this would be the most difficult thing that I would ever write in my life. You know, and to be honest, actually, he was right, because really, for every other thing that I wrote, even sometimes difficult papers and articles, and colleagues here that publish know it's very difficult to even publish one article that's peer-reviewed and accepted. But even those weren't as difficult, in my own experience, as doing the PhD. And this is like, I completed my PhD in 2006. I still remember the rigors of having to do it. So I said to him, thank you so much, but I have to tell you, writing this book felt harder for the very first time since I finished my PhD. I think it's one of the most difficult things I think I've ever written and project I've ever worked on for just numerous reasons. Numerous reasons because, as you know, FinTech is a very multidisciplinary subject area. So there's the finance, there's the technology, then of course the part that concerns me, the legal and regulatory dimensions of things. And then if you add on top of that, you're adding a study in the African context that with it comes with a lot of foundational knowledge that you need to know about the economies that you're working on, and the legal environment and the regulatory environment that they work on. So not just only was I trying to juggle that whole multidisciplinary aspect of the finance, the technology, understanding at least enough to be able to write about the legal and regulatory dimensions, I also had to bear in mind the countries that I was in as a case study. So it was hard. And anybody that is here, and I'm sure there are a few colleagues here, who knew about this process, I'd say to them, if only I had time, you know, I'll complete this project in 6 months. All I just need is 6 months of free time and I'll do it. All I just need. And I told so many people, like, you know, I just don't have time. I don't have time. And then I'd say to them, actually, it's all in my head. I just need time to sit down and put it down. Okay. And the pandemic happened. Okay, so the pandemic happened. There was all sorts of, obviously, issues around the pandemic. As an academic institution, colleagues here can verify it was a stressful time for us because we had to basically change our entire offering and make them deliverable in a way that we could do via, in a VLE, through VLE environments, okay, virtual learning environments. And that was really tough. So that kind of took away a lot of the time that I would have dedicated on the book. So I found the first year after the contract was signed, I hadn't done much at all on the book, and it was I was very, challenged by that. Somewhere in between, the Centre of FinTech launched with all the barrage of trying to launch a center, getting all the support, rallying and boosting the profile of the center. So the book kind of took, I pushed it to the back burner a bit. And then when I decided, when I had time to work on it, I'd work on it, and a lot of that meant kind of working around the clock and having no break at all. So sometimes I'll be working round the clock, literally working and trying to get sleep, and which is the reason why I appreciate my husband and my family so well, because at times when I needed to deliver stuff, at least on a home front, I got that time. So I'm really grateful for that, really grateful for that. The book eventually got completed, right? But I have to say, in the strangest writing experience for me, because usually what I'll do is, if I have a writing project, I would make sure I finish on time. I have enough time to go over the stuff that I'm submitting, whether it's a journal, a peer-reviewed journal article, whether it's whatsoever publication, a chapter in a book. I would have enough time, so I'm always on time. I just was not on time with this project at all. It just defied it all. So I found that I was writing at the tail. I was still writing at the tail end before submission. I was still, as in actively writing, leading up to the deadline for the submission date. I was literally, which was strange because I'm like, by now I need to have gone over this thing a few times before submitting the actual manuscript. But that didn't happen, so I submitted it. And obviously the manuscript came back with a lot of corrections, not corrections that were big, but corrections that required I needed to take time to sit down and have an extra 6 weeks to go over. And that was done. So I just thought to use this as an opportunity to encourage anybody who is on any type of writing project here, because I can see some of my students, whether you're a student, whether you're my colleague, academic in a writing project, just carry on, don't give up. Just keep doing it. And I pray that you have a nice publisher that is working with you, that is empathetic, because that helps a great deal as well. So thank you, Nicola Sharp, if you're online, for being so kind and generous with the time given to complete the project. So I'll go into the book now. And what I really wanted to say about the book, without actually giving a lot away, because of course I want as many of you as possible as can get the book to get it, is that one of the unique aspects of the book is that it does a case study on 6 countries. So it does a case study on Côte d'Ivoire, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and the choice of those countries was the result of actually having to select the strongest economies across the regional economic communities in sub-Saharan, well, not in sub-Saharan Africa, but in Africa generally, because of course Egypt is there as well. And the rationale for the book really is that we know that we still have 52, about as at the time the book was submitted anyway, the manuscript was submitted in February, we still have 52% of Africa, holistically now, that is unbanked, basically that are financially excluded, okay? 52% that are financially excluded. And this was just closer to the time I submitted the book in February. That percentage, right, was 80% in 2007. So between 2007, right, and 2024, we've managed to bring down that number to 52%, which is brilliant. Financial technology has played a critical role in that process. So the linkages with financial technology and financial inclusion is massive. One of the deepest examples that we've seen on the African continent is the success of M-Pesa in facilitating financial inclusion in Kenya, and how that model has been used, particularly in East Africa, to expand financial inclusion in that sub-region, okay? But what does law and regulation, what's the role of law and regulation in all of this? So usually, and from my own experience, and I'm sure it is with a lot of colleagues here, a lot of law colleagues here, when you go for any events, usually this is what I find, particularly in our fintech space, when you go for any event, the first thing I don't say is, oh, I work on the regulatory aspect of fintech. I don't say that because usually when people hear that, they feel like, here comes the regulator. Do you see? So you don't actually get that whole invitation to actually, talk about what you do and talk about what they're doing that you're interested in and everything. So that's usually not the first thing I would say to them. But instead, I would carry on talking to them and kind of say, actually, you know, the role of law in this situation actually can really help what you're doing, you know. If we had regulation that facilitates financial innovation, or what you're doing, don't you think you'd improve? And then I get the buy-in, yeah? And so this book does just that, okay? It looks at law and regulation as a facilitator, okay? As a facilitator of financial innovation that can then help facilitate financial inclusion. We still have this gap, okay? We still have this gap in financial, if you like, exclusion on the African continent that would have to be bridged. But because we've made a lot of progress from 2007 to 2024, right? At that pace of progress, if we go at that pace, one could roughly calculate that by 2055, almost the whole of Africa will be financially included. But then we know that it's not just going to happen the way it happened in the previous years between 2007 and 2029, because now we have the types of people across the different parts of Africa, some very far remote areas that probably don't have access to things like, you know, mobile phone or the internet and things like that. There'll be a little more that we will need to do, and hence there's a need to actually bring on board not just only, not just only, I'd say, innovators, but there's a need for a few players to actually help drive this opportunity, okay, to bridge this gap. Okay, so basically this book looks at the role of law and regulation, and in looking at the role of law is looking at the types of environment legally that can facilitate financial innovation, and then also looks at things like the types of approaches to regulation that can facilitate financial inclusion. So it starts really by looking at the theories of regulation, and then it begins to look at the various approaches of regulation and what those approaches mean. And I dare say actually some of those approaches can be adopted to other industries. But then it looks at different types of approaches, looks at the, I'd leave you to kind of, I won't go too into that. But the approaches talk about how any regulator, for example, reading the book, would be able to find out where they're at. And that the approach that they're adopting, even if they're saying nothing or refusing to deal with an emerging technology that has been brought to the jurisdiction or brought to the terrain, even if they refuse to actually acknowledge that and regulate, put any form of regulation in place, they're still going with a certain approach to regulation in theory. So the book looks at the various approaches to regulation. And so the book really appeals to innovators who will be needed, who will be needed to facilitate or bridge this gap of financial inclusion, so build this 48% that's left for us to reach. They will need that. But how many of you know that the 48%, even if we have all sorts of innovators in place, but we don't actually have the infrastructure, we don't have the internet infrastructure, whether 4G, 5G, happening in very remote parts of Africa, you can have as many innovations as you like, that may never happen. And so we need those innovators with those ideas, but with the backing of policymakers. And the book talks about the role that policy makers have to make. And part of the role that policymakers have to make is linked with the agenda to facilitate financial inclusion, which is linked with their commitments to the UN SDG goals that talks about economic inclusion, which financial inclusion is a part of, and also links with their commitments for the African Agenda 2063, which is basically the agenda to make, the African, to make Africa, if you like, great again, to make Africa the Africa that we want. Okay, so it's in the interest of policymakers to actually find ways that can help them comply or conform or put in place mechanisms to facilitate compliance with instituting the UN SDG goals, as well as the regional integration arrangements under the agenda, the Africa's Agenda 2063. 63. Kofi mentioned briefly about how that, particularly looking at the African Continental Free Trade Arrangement, how payments and the use of money is so integral to facilitate African trade. And that has been one of the fundamental problems, the fact that we don't have, convertible currencies that can facilitate those trade relations. We have some, the PAPS payment system enforced now, but again, still very slow progress there. The book deals with some of those areas. How does Africa as a continent facilitate payments for African continental trade through fintech? Okay, so the book does that. So that's to regulators. That's to policymakers. Okay, now to SMEs, and small businesses, and actually those that want to start something out use fintech, is for them to actually know the opportunities that exist in the various fintech products and services considered in the book. So in the book, as Kofi mentioned, we looked at different types of mobile financial services, particularly mobile money, crowdfunding, crypto assets, stable coins, and the like, opportunities potentially in decentralized finance. But of course, we know where we are with that for those that know in terms of actually regulating the space. We looked at central bank digital currencies. So the book also looks at central bank digital currencies, looks at open banking and open finance. And basically, in terms of sort of SMEs, the various opportunities, so SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, or micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, as we see most exist on the African continent. And then, of course, scholars. The book speaks and appeals to the heart of scholars, fundamentally because, as Kofi mentioned, and as Fatima mentioned actually in her speech, we need a lot of research around how to drive the agenda of financial innovation, but also linked with bridging the gap of financial inclusion. Okay, linked with bridging the gap of financial inclusion. And there's still so many questions that we still need to deal with. So things like digital identity, still a lot of research. What does that look like from an African perspective? Okay, so digital identity, things around climate and climate finance, for example. As we know, Africa, the African continent, as well as so many other developing countries, suffer actually from the implications of climate change. But in terms of financing adaptability, the financing and accessing of finance for those countries is very minimal. So there's that. Then there's also sustainability and fintech. So there's a huge dimension as to how sustainable is fintech. But then there are two sides to the coin. So fintech, there's an argument that certain dimensions of fintech is unsustainable. But then there's a dimension of fintech that says actually we can use fintech to deal with issues around, for example, climate change. And I'm sure the sustainability people online will be like, climate change sustainability is not just about climate change. Yes, I get that, but much more focused on sort of climate change here. So fintech and sustainability, but linked more with climate change. So what I would say is that where we're at now in facilitating financial inclusion, you almost feel as though you need to take a holistic approach to things. So we can't just say, actually, we need more innovators coming to Africa to just sort out this financial inclusion gap. No, we need the regulators to come on board. We need the policymakers to come on board. We need, academics. We need scholars to do some research in some dimensions that we're not quite sure about. And looking forward, actually, we need the opportunity to consider other dimensions. And I think I'll stop here, but I'm thinking more sort of a time when we would have financial services, maybe in virtual spaces, 100%. And what would that look like? What would be the requirements for those? So it almost feels as if you need to, for those that know how to swim or are learning to swim, in order to be able to take a forward action, you're doing a lot of things at the same time. You're working, if it's a front crawl or breaststroke, you're moving your hands, your legs, you have to be doing a lot of things. I think I will stop here. So I'd like to thank everybody once again for coming here, you know, honoring me, honoring the Centre of FinTech. Thank you. I've seen all of you online. I see you as well.